The facilitator of the discussion is Rakesh Sanghani, who is the managing partner with Prozev Partner. Prozev Partner are strategic advisors, and Rakesh himself has a track record of involvement, quite substantial involvement in shared service and finance transformation, and he's going to introduce his team as well.
Thank you very much, David. So how are we doing in terms of energy levels today? Are we enjoying the day? Reasonable. Well, it didn't sound like a lot of energy in the room, but we'll deal with that. I'll first introduce myself and the two esteemed panel members to my left. My name is Rakesh Sanghani. I'm a partner at a strategic advisory company. I'm your moderator for the panel discussion today. To the left of me, I have Libor Stenzel.
Hello.
Libor is the data quality manager for Covidien, who are, for those of you that don't know, a healthcare and medical devices supplier.
Yes.
To the left of Libor, we have Ankur Rai. Ankur is the global head of analytics at EXL. He has 13 years of analytics experience across many industries with a particular view on banking and insurance. So I'll ask the two of you to take a seat.
Thank you.
And I think the first thing I'd say about the topic today, and the topic today is around harnessing data analytics and integrity to drive operational efficiencies. The first thing I'd say about data is that data is like people. And this was told to me by an LSE professor literally last week. If you torture the numbers enough, they'll tell you anything. And with that in mind, we begin the session around analytics. So again, analytics is a term that's overused in our industry. There's a lot of different understandings of what this term means. So the first question I'd like to ask the panel is, can you define analytics? What is analytics?
Well, very simply, it's an arraying and assessment of the data that eventually should guide you to achieve your business goals, right? That's a very simplistic definition, I'd say.
And I think when I think about it, let me create a spectrum. So it starts with, it could be someone in sourcing, analyzing a bunch of vendors, deciding who sort of matches on quality, speed, and cost. On the other hand, it could be super complex where you're working with a bank trying to predict how many of the small businesses would go bankrupt. Mm-hmm. So I think it's a huge spectrum. What stays fundamentally constant across all analytics is, are you, one, using data, two, to create measurable business impact? I think those things are possibly what analytics is all about.
Interesting. So to make it a little bit more complicated and clearer for me, if that is analytics, what is analytics not? What are the common confusions that exist in our marketplace in terms of analytics? Ankur.
So let me try to answer the spirit of your question rather than just the words. Analytics is what technology probably was in the mid-90s. It's the DNA of every process in an organization. So to say what analytics is not sometimes might border on the naive. But let me actually go a step further and say what it is not only. There's a concept, there's a feeling that you're not really doing analytics if you're not using Facebook, Twitter data to predict what a customer is going to buy tomorrow. Or there's a concept that if your organization is not using big data, you're not doing analytics. I think that's what analytics is not. Analytics is everything. It spans the analyst sitting on an Excel sheet to your PhD scientist sitting with mainframe computers predicting when the next heart attack is going to strike or when a person is going to require knee surgery building complicated models. So it's a slightly longer way of answering what it is not. But how do you say what is not when something's going to be the DNA of your organization?
But isn't that almost like saying analytics can be anything?
Actually, that's so. The reason I try to create a parallel is I think analytics and technology are basically hand in hand. So, what technology is to an organization, analytics is. If we actually wanted to stress it, analytics is not judgment. So, analytics is not what you build up through 20 years and then make a call on a business decision. Analytics tells you what the data is saying, and then you use your business judgment to prevent the numbers from telling you what you want to tell them by torturing them. So business judgment is basically the balm which sort of ensures that the numbers don't tell you something which doesn't make sense.
Interesting. So Libor Ancor talks about not torturing the numbers being what analytics is about, and analytics is not torturing. What would you say analytics is not?
Well, to me, it's mainly the torturing of the numbers, right? Because I've seen so many examples where people just, go and they try to support their arguments with any sort of numbers that they just take out of their pocket, I think there's a widespread belief in finance that whatever you say, and really whatever you say, as long as you can provide some numbers and maybe a couple of pie charts, it's going to have to be the truth. And I don't think that's the case.
Interesting. Okay, well, let's open this up. And the challenge that the panel have today is to convince you all in the room that business analytics or analytics is worthwhile and not just a fad. So with that in mind, we're going to go to our first poll question. And hopefully those words mean that a screen turns up in front of me. Or not. Could we go to our first poll question? I sense the technology is not going to work with me today. Great, that seems to be working. So, you've all got your vote buttons in front of you. To what extent has your organization embraced analytics to date? Not at all, and no intention of doing so. Not at all, but does intend to do so in the short stroke medium term, in limited or specific areas, or broadly across the business. Please vote now. Right. So in limited or specific areas, whether done in-house or provided by a third party. Fantastic. So most of you are actually using some form of analytics, which is really interesting because the panel and I discussed this before we came on stage today, and the assumption we made was actually most people wouldn't be using analytics. So to put you on the spot, guys, what do you make of that? 66% of people do use analytics, but limited to specific areas.
So I think two ways to think about this, right? I think it's a reflection of where probably the entire industry is. Everyone's using analytics for certain things, but given the scope, which we sort of started off by saying that it can actually be used across processes, today you find it limited to either the risk organization or the marketing organization. So this is probably a reflection of that, because in the organizations we see this tends to sort of marry to what we see there. I think if you looked at purely banking and insurance, you might see a slightly different percentage. As you move across other domains, you'd probably see this graph represented. Libor, what do you think?
Well, actually, I think you're right. Plus, I mean, coming from the shared service environment, I think and this really corresponds with the previous presentation by the Hackett, where we're doing fragments. Every shared service center have to report their KPIs, etc., etc. However, we don't have like a sort of overarching analytics of what the actual deliverables are. In other words, I mean, what we're doing in shared service centers or in finance is we try to bring some benefit to the company as such as a whole. However, we're only doing analytics of one part of the shared service center, and that's very narrow. I could give you examples of, how this fails on many occasions. So,
and I'd like to touch on an example actually, but an example without using the word analytics of the most value that you've received from an initiative around using, I can use it, business analytics.
So let me actually, this is perfect. So how many of you have heard of the Target story? Target's a North American retailer like Tesco. Any of you have heard it? Because it's a very, very famous, so you're going to love this story then, if none of you have heard it. So,
I see a few hands going up.
So Target is like a Tesco-like retailer, and they basically figured out that it was extremely hard to change customer behavior. So if people went to one particular retailer, they didn't change behavior unless a life event took place. And one of the big life events which changed behavior was the birth of a kid. That's useful information to have. How do you predict the birth of a kid? Now, there are a lot of public sources which Target figured out, which told you that a kid had been born in the family after the baby had been born. After the baby is born, you get flyers from everyone. So the challenge Target faced was trying to predict that a baby is going to be born 6 months before the birth. So basically 3 months into a pregnancy, they wanted a retailer, which basically sells milk, vegetables, diapers, wanted to predict when a pregnancy was 3 months in. They looked at all their data, and they couldn't go outside for that data. They looked at their purchase behavior, and they were able to predict this with above 90% accuracy. Any guesses on how they were able to do this? You'll be blown away by the simplicity of the finding. So let me tell you, one of the ingredients, so there were two things which people purchased, which gave them 90% hit rate on pregnancy 3 months in. I'll give you one of them, vitamins. But vitamins on its own is not enough. There was a second one which locked the prediction. Do you know what the second one was? Any guesses? Sorry? No. Unscented lotions. What they basically found was vitamins plus unscented lotions is a rock solid 90% plus lock for a pregnancy in the 3rd month. And then there's urban legend. They basically ran an entire campaign, and they basically sent that to one of the households where the father didn't know that the daughter was having a kid. And that's how it actually came to light. The fascinating thing about this story is, one, it tells very well. So that's really great. But the interesting thing about this is to come to this simplistic insight that a person purchasing vitamins and unscented lotions is 3 months into a pregnancy took combing through huge amounts of data, separating 100 wrong variables to arrive at this one big variable. And the value of this small insight, after this insight was figured out, all they had to do was in an Excel sheet, go out, figure out who's buying these two things, lock and send a campaign. The value of this was they were able to convert behavior. They were able to tap into new households which were never going to buy from them. That's a story about the true use of analytics. I don't think I use the word analytics at all in this story.
No, I think that's a great story, and one that I'm sure I'll use against my wife at some point. And a great example. So thank you for that. Libor, similarly, can you give us an example of a great use of analytics without using the term analytics, because I feel it's a term that's really overused?
Okay. Well, my story is a bit simpler than this one. But in my previous job, I was basically managing a supplier database. Now, we had all these fantastic strategic initiatives, how to leverage the spend and everything. However, from my team, from the people that actually were entering the supplier data, we knew that there was a lot of suppliers entered that, were maybe used once, maybe twice. However, if you take the cost of actually creating the supplier, processing, raising the PO, processing the invoice, paying the invoice, potentially dealing with any other problems, in the process, the cost of that would be probably 100 plus euros. Now, if you have an invoice that is about 50 euros to pay, well, that doesn't make business sense, right? So, and I'm not going to use that word. We just used the data that we had, by processing these transactions. And we realized, well, we've got a problem. We've got maybe 5% of the database that basically doesn't meet our purpose. We should be, decreasing the cost, and we're not really doing that. And what we did was we basically introduced a system by which we could pay without actually creating the supplier in the database, without processing the invoice and all the other stuff. We just create like a bypass of the major system. It's not as exciting as pregnancy, I'm afraid.
Actually, your story, Libor, sparked one more. And now you've got me started on stories. Let me tell you another quick, this one's much smaller.
Yeah, let's make sure it's quick.
Very interesting story. We're working with a bank, and they wanted to lend money to small businesses. And they had the normal variables to figure out whether the person was going to pay back or not. And then they started looking at the data they were not using. And the one variable which they figured out was the strongest to predict whether this company was going to pay back or not, that was a good company, was if they had automatic debit from their bank account to their credit card. So step back for a moment and think about it. All of us sort of link our credit cards, or a lot of us link it, and the indicator there was that if you're not worried about the amount of money going out every month and it's on auto debit, you're a great risk for the bank to have. Now, obviously this wasn't predictable across the base, but this is again the value of analytics. A small variable exposed really high quality small businesses to them, which they would have charged high rates because they would have attached a risk to them, which wasn't actually true. So just your supplier story sparked this one, and I thought it was interesting
Thank
too.
you.
Okay, before you carry on with the stories, I think we'll go to another poll question. So if we could have the next poll question, please. I'm going to assume it's behind me. So this question is around your answer to the first question. So what's preventing you from taking more benefit from analytics within your organizations? Is it A, you don't know where to start? B, you cannot see or measure the benefits? C, you lack the skills to do it? D, you don't want to, or you don't know how to engage with external specialist parties? E, you regulatory issues prevent you from moving forward? Or F, frankly, it's more than just one of the above? Please vote now. Fantastic. 57%, that's more than half the room, feel it's more than one of those issues that prevent them from taking more and more benefit from analytics. So this seems like one of the reasons why analytics in your businesses is used to maybe just a limited amount and not pushed broader across the whole organization. Ancor, this seems to be some of the challenges that our audience are facing. How do you respond to that? What can you say to help these guys?
I actually want to respond to Group C rather than the last one, because I think a lot of those who voted for more than one probably also see lack of skills as a big one if we use that same ratio. And I'm going to be a little candid. I think this goes back to how we defined analytics. We sort of define use of analytics as the Mount Everest, and then we measure ourselves by that, and if we aren't climbing Mount Everest, then we probably aren't doing analytics. And why are we not climbing Mount Everest? Oh, because we don't climb mountains that high. I think in reality, we're all doing analytics within our organization. So I think that number should actually look much higher. However, I think what is happening is two sort of phenomena are taking place today. One is we're investing a lot of money into analytics. We're not seeing the impact because we've not got the proper sort of services or the proper business problem to solve. And we're saying, we're not seeing the impact because we don't have the correct skills to see the impact. And maybe that's not the answer. Maybe we're actually not trying to solve the correct business problem. And when we've looked across organizations, Libor, you're probably going to sort of echo the same thought. The biggest differentiator between creating business impact out of analytics and not creating business impact out of analytics has nothing to do with the people, has nothing to do with the technology, only has to do with the clarity with which the business problem is defined. Target's business problem was how to shift behavior. The bank's business problem was how to lend to better small businesses. So I want to sort of twist it and say I think it may be less about the skills and resources, which is a challenge, but I think it's going to be a bigger challenge 2 years down the line when the low-hanging fruit are captured. I think there's a lot of low-hanging fruit to do, which can be got through analytics from Excel today.
And that raises two questions from me. The first is around where you start. So, and I've heard different views about this in previous workshops. Some start at the data end. Some say, to get analytics, to get from data to trend analysis to insight, you have to start with the data and cleanse your data, which is a horrible task to do and causes a number of issues. Others say you start with a business problem and work backwards and get the stakeholder buy-in to cleanse the data and to invest in the right areas. Libor, from your perspective as a data quality manager, where do you start?
Well, I think I'd start with the business problem or rather business goal. I don't like to, connect data analysis with the negatives, with only problems. But let's say you have a goal, you want to achieve something or you want to do away with something negative in your process, in your business. Now, obviously, how do you do that? You need to measure the problem. Then you start looking at the data. So it's step 2, right? You look at what sort of data you have and you try to use them as much as possible. Obviously, not always that data will be useful. Like, you might need to reshape your data modeling, you might need to create a new reporting tool or something like that to be able to just really pinpoint the problem that you have or something that would guide you to your business problem, to your business goal. And that's what I would start, basically with the problem, with the reality, and only then use the analytics, because what I see very often again, and I'm sure all of you have the same experience, there's someone creating an Excel file with a lot of charts, then someone creates a PowerPoint presentation, and then a third person presents that PowerPoint presentation to the board. Now the board is probably too busy, checking their emails on their BlackBerry or something. They don't even know what's being presented, and that's actually a major disconnect in there. I see a real major disconnect between the experts that are creating the analyses and then actually know what the numbers mean, and then the board, the managers, the directors that can make the decisions. There is too much of PowerPoints, too many people in there, too many meetings that just disconnect those two. And I think that's a major problem, not an answer to your question, but...
Right. No, I think you answered it. So starting at the business outcome and the business problem and working backwards rather than cleansing the data first.
For sure, yes.
Okay, well, related to that, and Ankur, I know you've come up with some great examples that I'll take away as well. If you could come up with, I'm just going to give you an area, given your years of expertise, and ask for an example where analytics can be used in this area. And I'm going to choose areas and processes that are quite common. So, for example, is there a good application of business analytics in expenses? And if so, how?
So that's actually a simpler one. I thought you'd go something more complicated like London taxi cabs.
Well, don't worry, I'm building up to it.
No, expenses is a simple one. I'll answer that one, and then I'm sure you'll challenge with some more innovative ones. Expenses, there's so many interesting things going along just to sort of, one, to enable people to enter expenses well, to smart scan expenses, and then to sort of oversee and audit expenses. I think there's a lot of analytics use over there. Also, procurement uses that to basically look at vendors and so on. So I think there are fascinating ones. Challenge me with London taxi cabs.
Not yet. So, because I want the guys here to have a takeaway. Okay. So most of the audience today, I'm sure, have an expenses function, expensive process. So they're running expenses, let's say, in a shared service center environment. What can they go away from today's session and do differently to go back to their business and say, look, guys, this is the value from analytics within expenses?
So there are 2 or 3 things which sort of are typically done within the expense management function, right? So the first one basically is outliers and looking at your demand, looking at the volume of expenses. So you basically by person, and I'm assuming this is sort of expense management at a personnel level. Obviously, there's a whole range of analytics you can do around suppliers and your supplier expense management. But you first look at basically volume and demand. So you look at if certain business groups of same size and same utilization have expenses which are out of whack with that. I'm actually pretty sure a lot of you already do that to basically identify outliers. So that's step 1. I think where analytics becomes more powerful is rather than going to every business and trying to have this conversation where a business is going to give you a justified reason, analytics will allow you to peel the onion further. It will actually allow you to identify where there are outliers, where there is a certain business which should not be traveling, which should not be incurring these sorts of marketing expenses versus another which should. So it can allow you, for example, to do industry benchmarking across similar businesses. Simply, what is the genesis? What is sort of the inner machine of whatever I'm saying? Can you use more data to improve the business decision you're trying to make, whether you're spending appropriate amount of expenses? So what is that new amount of data? The new amount of data which I talked about right now was bringing data from outside your organization. You could as well, for example, start looking at data within your organization, which providers they're using and so on. I do feel though that we'll be, to this audience, since it's so knowledgeable, we would almost be prescriptive on some of these things because I feel a lot of you would already be doing some of these things. So therefore, I don't want to be, again, naive by suggesting some things which you're already covering.
Excellent. Okay. We'll move on. And the third area I wanted to cover today was around giving some advice to the audience in terms of where do we go from here. So if I took an organization that had no prior experience of analytics, which I'm sure there's some in the audience, what would you advise them in terms of getting started and where they go from here? Libor.
Well, I think it's actually the same answer to the second question, because basically they need to have a look at where their pain points are. They should identify, okay, our pain points are here, our goals are there, and then they should just look at the data they have, whatever it is, and think, okay, is this data useful for me or not? If yes, then okay, let's build some models. Let's track the data. If not, how do we get the data that we need? That's basically the very beginning.
And so if that is so simple, why isn't every organization doing this? Why are there organizations that haven't even started on that journey?
I don't think there are so many that wouldn't be doing at least something very simple. I mean, we obviously, everyone, when we say analytics, thinks, well, it's a huge dump of data from an ERP system and everything, but analytics can be an Excel sheet, Sometimes, if there is a person that can use the data effectively, an Excel sheet is more than a huge presentation with 20 graphs.
Let me take a crack at that, and let me utilize what you actually talked about earlier, Rakesh, the audience. I think when you think about this from a shared services perspective, a lot of analytics is done today, but it is not within, and I'm borrowing also from the last presentation, the GBS function. Analytics is yet not a shared service, right? So analytics in a bank, risk has a separate function. It might be doing it with a vendor. It might have 200, 300 people, but it is not part of their F&A, HR, and customer servicing operation. An insurance company would be doing it the same way. A manufacturing company would be doing it the same way. So I wanted to sort of rephrase your question. The question was, how do companies at different parts of the evolution start? I think if you're in shared services, analytics is going to be a part of shared services in the next 24 months. It's just not today. And it's not that different from how F&A and customer servicing started 10 to 12 years back. It started within the businesses and then got aggregated together. So as a shared services, as part of shared services, I think an interesting thing which we've seen a lot of people do is rather than trying to tell the business to make analytics a part of the shared services, they run analytics maturity models. So they partake, for example, in a cross-industry analytics maturity model, which sort of tells them where their organization is in analytics maturity and prepares the shared services organization to earmark areas which they can target. So I think that's how I would think about it for shared services which is trying to get into analytics.
Okay, so for most of the audience, there were shared services that had some experience of analytics. What about for that community? What would be your tip, Libor?
Well, I really would go back to the disconnect that I was talking about earlier, you know, because from my practice, I very often see that, you know, we in the shared service center, we report our KPIs, we report our performance, you know, we provide it to everyone, and then in the local companies, no one actually cares, no one understands. And that actually goes again to that disconnect in the Hackett group where it was said that basically we are delivering, however, the companies, our customers do not see that impact. And it's just because, you know, we're creating some sort of analytics in-house with speaking our language, KPIs, SLA, whatever. However, in the local companies, the customers, they maybe don't speak the same language or they don't even care about the same things like we do, you know. The absurd fact is that we are there for them. We are there to mutually deliver benefit to the corporation as a whole. So I think that the second step, you know, a shared service center that does some analytics should be to find the common language and common data model with the rest of the companies.
Okay.
I mean, with their customers.
Dave, borrowing from you, let me be a little provocative, especially to this audience. The survey at the end of the last presentation said good, fast, and cheap. Those were the adjectives used. None of those adjectives are applicable for analytics because if you're judging analytics on being good, fast, or cheap, that organization is not going to leverage analytics. Analytics should only be measured on one metric. Is it able to create business impact? Measurable, clear linkage between what you're doing, which is 10x the amount you're spending today. And if you're not doing that, then you're not doing analytics. So that's the thought I'm going to leave you with. For analytics to enter, and that is the goal of shared services anyway, to basically have a link to value and revenue. But for analytics to be part of shared services, one of those adjectives there has to be the business impact being created. It's not, it's not a transaction anymore. Mm-hmm. Am I being able to directly link by spending 1 million on analytics to this $10 million value that's being created?
Excellent. Thank you very much. And this is the stage as we come towards the close of the session where we really assess how well the panel have done today. So we've got a final question for you. If we go to the final poll question, please. And the poll question is, have we helped change any preconceived ideas or inspired you to act today? A is no, but thank you to the panel for trying. B is no, because they were sold already. C is yes, I get it, but. And D is yes, I know, and I'm going to go out today and I'm going to do it. So please vote now. Fantastic. Okay, so B and C seem to be the dominant answers. So there's people in the room who are either sold already, which is great to hear, doing some business analytics, or understand it, but have a number of challenges that they have that we spoke about today, which makes it difficult to actually implement analytics. So I think I want you to take a couple of questions at the end to understand what some of those challenges are. So I think this is a fantastic opportunity now to talk to a couple of the experts and really share with them some of your challenges, and let's see if the guys can't help you with that. So please let us know if you have any questions.
I'm going to come over with the microphone. Hold on.
Thank you very much. It was a really inspiring presentation. My question is, analytics, is it an engine or it is a people-driven? I mean, it's easy always to say, let us analyze all the data and come up with decisions. I mean, can we develop an engine to do that, a function, so we can use it perfect, or we leave it to the people to try their way to analyze the situation? Thank you.
So I'm going to paraphrase the question slightly. I think the question was, how do you create that engine of analytics? And just to add to that, does it really need to sit in shared services? Ankur.
The first one is easier. How do you create that engine is you need to seed it with business understanding. So you need to seed it with business domain knowledge, because it's not going to be seeded by people who only do numbers. If you have people who only do numbers, no one's going to listen to them. So I think the engine is created by taking someone who spent 5 years in the business, partnering them with someone who spent 5 years in analytics and creating impact. When you ask me about does it really need to sit in shared services, let me give you a couple of examples and then you decide whether the way it exists needs to sit in shared services or not. People who utilize analytics today have created dedicated analytics units, which are range from 200 to 1,000 people with a global footprint. Some have, it's on the WISP, so it sits in a building next to their shared services. It sits on 2 floors where the bottom 3 floors are shared services, but it's not completely integrated in terms of management. I answer it in this way because I really don't know the answer as such, right? Does it need to report into the same management? Are they exactly the same processes? What makes me especially wary is if you put it in shared services and you use good, fast, and cheap, then you're going to destroy analytics. So that's why I say it needs to be close, but I don't know if it needs to sit exactly. But the engine, there's only one formula: business plus analytics partnering together.
Fantastic. Libor.
I think actually this is not so much about location, but to me, shared services centers actually sit in a very special situation, because by implementing shared services, what you're saying is you're creating a huge system with standardized processes and therefore standardized transactions, hence standardized data. In other words, you've got the step 1, right? You've got the data that you need to do any analytics that you want. So why not combine these two? It doesn't matter whether they sit at the shared service center, whether they sit somewhere else. We live in the global world. It's all electronic data. It all can be transferred through the internet. The thing is, you have a huge silo of data that are standardized, and you can rely on them probably more than if you collect data across several companies. So why not using that benefit?
Excellent. Well, I'd love to take more questions, but I'm afraid we're out of time. We'll be around for drinks and the award ceremony afterwards. I guess to close, I just wanted to say my closing takeaways. Really, I took out 2 key takeaways from that session. The first was starting at the business outcome. And the second was focusing on the business impact. And those were really my 2 key takeaways from the session. Could we have a round of applause for Ankur and Libor, who I think did magnificently at this late stage.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Thank you very much.
Okay, so we're going to go into a quick networking exercise to get some of the